Hello everybody. In this video we're going to be working on collecting some bank financial data and making nicely formatted tables with them in Excel. So we're going to make an asset composition table, and then for the class project there's also this loan composition table as well. So I'm going to show you how to do this one, and it's exactly the same process to make the other one. We're going to do this by going out and collecting FDIC data, downloading it into Excel, and then making the formatted table in Excel and copying it over into Word. So let's go out and start to do that. The way you can do that is go out to Google, search for FDIC bank financial data, and you should have a bank data and statistics option available. In here you have all sorts of financial data for banks. We're going to be using the institution directory and type in the name of the bank that you're interested in. I'm going to use Park National. You can include just a small portion of the bank. As long as some of it's there, you'll see the options available to you, and you can select accordingly. So some other banks have Park National in their name. Here I'm interested in Park National Bank, Newark, Ohio, 9.6 billion in assets. So 6653, click on that certification number, and then you're in this repository of all sorts of financial data. You've got balance sheet data, income statement data, performance data, and some other stuff here. This goes back all the way into the 90s. It starts to become quarterly once we hit 2000. And other information here as well. So you could come in here and do the assets and liabilities in order to make this asset composition table. But to make it a really useful analysis, we're also going to add some peer groups. So I'm going to go ahead and I can still get the asset and liability data by clicking this custom peer group. And so 6653, that is Park's number, so you don't need to do anything here. You just need to make the peer groups over here. You have a few options here. You can select a single institution to compare it to, a custom number of, just type in a bunch of different names of banks that are related. Oftentimes a bank itself will have created a custom peer group, and so you can go out and find what does my bank think that its peer group is and just write those in. But then the other option is a standard peer group, which is what I'm going to use. What you can do here is pick banks that are of a similar size. So like I said, Park is 9.6 billion. So I'm going to pick other banks between 1 and 10 billion. We can make it national, although since Park is quite a regional bank, I actually want to pick not one, I'm even going to pick two. Quarterly bank report, these are Federal Reserve regions. So the Fed, they have 12 regional banks, but they have just these handful of regions here. And you can find online the QBP regions from the Fed, and you see Ohio here is in the Chicago region. So I'm definitely going to include the Chicago region since that's where most of Park's banks are. Although Park also has a number of banks in North and South Carolina. So I'm actually going to do two peer groups. I'll pick the Chicago region, and I'm going to add another $1 to $10 billion Atlanta region. Now, when you're writing up the report, you should include what are the details of the peer group. So they are the banks in the Chicago region, in the Atlanta region from $1 to $10 billion. You should include what are those regions. So what you should basically list all of these states, so that the reader understands what the actual peer group is. Okay, so that looks good. June 30th, most recent data for all of these. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And we have again, a number of options here. I'm going to keep it general with assets and liabilities. And I'm actually going to need to download both of these, dollars and percentage of total assets. And here's why. So if you click into dollars, I do want that for Park. We have this 9.6 billion, just as we saw before. But the kind of issue here is that we have, well, one issue I'm seeing, we have 500 institutions here, and that's a problem because that's not in the asset range. So I'm going to have to change that in a second. But what this is doing in the dollar amount is aggregating all of these up among all these banks. So that's not so useful. That's why we'll grab this column of data for the bank that we're interested in. But to make the comparisons, we're going to use the percentage of total assets. Really quickly though, let me go back and make this peer group correct. Here we go. 1 to 10 billion. That looks better. Okay, so let's go ahead and download both of these. Dollars, click into that. We have total assets. We're going to break those down like we saw here into loans, securities, and cash. And if there's anything else of important size, we'll grab that too. But for most banks, there's not really. Here we've got cash, 140 million, securities, 1 billion, loans, 7 billion. Some of these other things are not all that useful. We're not going to grab other all by itself because we're going to lump all the other stuff into one category by its own. So anyway, just looking here at the total assets, which by the way are equal to total liabilities and capital, 9.6 billion. We're just going to use a few of these from the top category. Go ahead and save that as a CSV file. And then come back over here and save the percent assets as a CSV file as well. Save to CSV. Now, when you're doing the loan composition part of the paper, you just using the same tables, but then you click into net loans and leases. And so here it's asking for real estate loans, and then all of these, commercial and industrial, consumer, and that's what we have. Real estate loans, all these, farm, commercial, industrial, consumer, these are consumer loans, loans to individuals. So you can do the same thing, and then this is really where you're going to be able to see some interesting comparisons across the groups. Park, for example, has 15% consumer loans compared to 4 and 2. And that's largely here because of these large amounts of automobile loans. So anyway, once you go into here, you'll be able to find some really interesting differences between your group and its peers. Or at the very least, even if you're not comparing to the peers, there are implications of having a lot more automobile loans and potentially fewer commercial and industrial loans to others in the industry. So there are unique risks and opportunities that you should think about and kind of analyze in your write-up. Okay, but anyway, we have the asset composition tables that we've downloaded here in dollars and in percent of assets. I'm going to open them both. So here is Park's sum total of assets in each category. We actually don't need these, like I said. Instead, what we want to put here are the shares. So download this one. And here are the shares. So let me just grab the whole column and copy it and paste it over here. So just having all of this here to make sure it all lines up, total liabilities, allowance for loan, lease losses. So everything's fine. Everything lines up. So what we can do now is kind of start to get rid of some of this stuff. I'll delete these. I'll delete these. Okay, and again, all we really need is total assets, cash, securities, and loans. That's it. So I'm actually going to delete the rest of all of this. Oops. And drag this down, get rid of all these as well. Okay. Oh, and we don't need total employees either. So that's all the data we need for the table, and now it's just a matter of making it look nice. First thing I want to do is rearrange this. I want total assets on the bottom, loans and leases I want on the top. What I'm going to do is just grab this, since we already have these numbers here, Control-Shift-L to filter, or do it over here. And I'm just going to flip these, largest to smallest. So loans are on the top, they have the largest amount, securities, cash, and total assets. Now, this total assets is 100, but if you notice, these three, because we deleted so many things, don't add up to 100, it's only 86. So I'm going to insert a new row here for other assets. And we can just take the total minus the sum of everything else. And drag that across. These don't show up because it's a percentage. And we're actually going to change that later, but I just want to show you. Now everything's fine. If we take this, that adds up to 100 by definition. Okay, we don't need the filter anymore, so we can come over here, just uncheck that. We don't need this. The number of institutions you could leave in the table, or when you're talking about the peer group in the text itself or in a footnote of the text, you can say the Chicago peer group includes 137 institutions between $1 and $10 billion in assets from these states: Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. So talk about the peer groups, but yeah, we don't necessarily need this in the table itself. We don't need these numbers anymore. And now it's time to just start formatting. First of all, we have an extra column here. I'm going to rename these loans and leases. Securities, I'm just going to call this cash. And here we have assets, and this is in thousands of dollars. What I would like to do is put the thousands of dollars on a second line. The way you can do this, you can't hit enter, it doesn't work. I'm going to hit Alt, enter. Good trick in Excel, Alt, enter will give you a new line. And then these are the share of total assets, but because we have three different ones, I'm going to do share of total assets up here. I'll put the name of the bank, the Chicago region. Is that right? Yeah, Chicago is first. And the Atlanta region. We need a title. This will be table 1, and we'll call it asset composition and peer analysis. Park National Bank, and the date, Q2 2020. Okay, let's add the source, FDIC. And we're looking pretty good. What we want to do is start adding in some formatting for some easier distinction between the rows. And so we could highlight each one of these and make it gray every other. But instead of doing that, an easy way to do that is grab all of this, format it as a table, and any of them that have an alternating white, gray, or if you wanted, white, blue, I'm just going to select this one. I did not select the headers, so I'm going to leave that blank. And we're left with this. But the main thing we want is that formatting. So I'm actually just going to convert that back to a range, just so that it keeps the formats. We'll select that whole row and delete it. And then we have this nice formatting. Let's go ahead just so that we can see. If you go up here to view and you uncheck grid lines, that'll kind of give us a better idea of what this is looking like. Let's select everything. In the Word document itself, we want Times New Roman 12, so let's go ahead and put that here. These need some work. Let's wrap the text and center, and actually we'll center it in both ways. We'll center all of this in both ways. Share of total assets, we want a border under that. And we could merge and center. Merge and center will sometimes create issues in Excel when you try to do other stuff. So for this purpose, it would work perfectly fine. But I like to just be in the habit of, instead of merging and center, you can do align. And in this horizontal alignment, because I've selected all three cells here, I can center across selection, and it won't give me some of the problems that otherwise sometimes happen with merge and center. Okay, so we've got that. We have the title is a little bit long, so we can extend these a little bit. Extend this a little bit. This. Okay, so that should be fine. I'm going to open this up a little bit just to make it kind of a bit bigger, center that vertically, even just a little bit more. It's a small enough table, it doesn't matter too much. I'll do the same thing here and here. Okay, let's add a border under here, under the title, and between other and total. Okay, that's looking really nice. I personally, instead of having all of these percentage signs, I would rather just up here say percentage of total assets as a percent and convert all of these into numbers. To do that, I can just set these out over here, multiply them by 100, and we'll get the whole number percentage. We have 3 columns there down to 100. I'm going to copy that and over here paste as values. It's still formatted as a percent, so that's why it's looking weird. We just come back over here, convert it to a number. 1 decimal should work fine, and we're good to go there as well. Don't need this anymore. Now, I would also like these to be a little better centered, but instead of using center, which will mess up the alignment of the decimal places, keep it right justified and just move it over a couple times. There. That looks good. Yeah, and otherwise that's looking good. We can maybe move this over once or twice. That looks better. And otherwise, I think we're done. Table 1, Asset Composition and Peer Analysis, Park National Bank, Q2 2020. Yep, and we have our source. We could in here we could put the Chicago region and the Atlanta region information, like is done in this table. Although this can also be done within the Word document itself. I would rather do that to make the table nice and clean. So now what you can do is copy, again, make sure if you have not already, uncheck the grid lines, because if you check the grid lines and then you try to move it over to Excel, first of all, if we copy and paste this into Excel, for this table it might not be a big issue, but if we just do a general Control-V paste, well, that's useful. It tells me I spelled this wrong. Then we have this, but Chicago region and Atlanta region have been kind of extended. The table is bigger than before. They're not centered anymore. So some of that formatting work that I did is not there anymore. So let's undo that. Come back over here, fix my typo, analysis. And instead of copying and pasting generally, we want to copy and paste it as a picture. But this is where the grid lines come in. If we do this, copy, paste as picture, the grid lines are still here, and that doesn't look good. So delete that one, get rid of the grid lines, copy, and paste as a picture. And so now we have a really nicely formatted table, matches up exactly with the formatting we created in Excel. And so then it just kind of works out. What you see is what you get, right? And so then be sure when you're talking about the table up above, you reference the table as it's titled. So if you're searching for bank-specific data, you'll find it in Table 1, for example. And then below the table, make sure you're writing observations and kind of implications. Here, Park has more loans and leases than the other banks, particularly in the Atlanta region, but fewer securities, right? And so there are some implications of that, much less cash. And so this other assets as well is quite large. So what you could do is kind of dive in and see in the raw data, other assets. So why is that so large? It looks to be generally the all other assets category is bigger, but otherwise this one is significantly larger. That's where that's coming from. Federal funds sold and reverse repurchase agreements. And so you don't necessarily, for these purposes, need to know what that means. But you could go ahead and say, Park, they have many more additional assets outside of these other banks. That's largely because they have significantly higher federal funds sold. You could just kind of write about that. And if you get curious, kind of look up what are going on, and if there's some line item in a balance sheet or an income statement that you don't know about, go out and kind of look that up or ask me about it. So just from this simple kind of peer comparison table, we can already start to see some differences. Once you do this with the loan composition, that's going to be even stronger. Okay, so anyway, this is what we're looking for. Nicely formatted table, nice rows and columns matching the same formatting as the paper, with a description of what's going on, a description of the peer group with a little bit more detail, either in the text or as a footnote, and observations about your findings. Okay, so that'll do it for the table part. Again, don't forget to look up any historical or kind of bank-specific details in an annual reports, or just kind of news, or even Wikipedia has interesting historical information about some largely established banks. So include that, and then include these tables, and you'll be good to go. So if you do have any questions, feel free to let me know. If somebody else is watching this, feel free to throw questions into the comments, and I'll try to get to those as best as I can. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.